Boker Tov. Daf Yomi is Yevamos Daf Tezai, Yevamos 16. In today's Daf Yomi, we're studying the merit of Ruben ben Shlomo V'Sar Malka, and also we're studying in memory of Bobby Thomas and Gray's mother Beverly and her grandmother Grace. So yesterday we had been discussing the last couple of days that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel argued about if a man has two wives, one of the wives is and he dies, and the surviving brother, is a relative to one of the wives, but not the other wife. I just see that Danny and Gray joined now, so let me say again, we're studying today in memory of Ruven ben Shlomo V'Sar Malka, and also in memory of Gray's brother, Bobby, her mother Beverly, and her grandmother Grace. So the Daf Yomi tells us in a situation where the brother-in-law dies, where a man dies, he leaves behind two wives, one of whom was the daughter of the surviving brother, and one of whom is not the daughter of the surviving brother. And Beis Hillel says, in the case of a co-wife of a relative, you don't do yibum at all, and the woman or chalitza, and the woman can just marry into the marketplace, marry wherever she wants. She can go out and get a shidduch. Whereas Beis Shammai argues with that, and Beis Shammai says no. Beis Shammai says that such a person has to do yibum or chalitza. The co-wife must do yibum or chalitza with the surviving brother. So the Gemara tried to see whether or not Beis Shammai actually acted on their opinion, or it was just a theoretical discussion. And so now, 3 lines on the top on 16a, the rabbis had a report from Rabbi Dosa ben Horkinus. Gufa b'mei Rabbi Dosa ben Horkinus hitiru tsaras abbas la'achem. In the days of Rabbi Dosa ben Horkinus, they allowed the co-wives of the daughter to the brothers, meaning to say they were acting like Beis Shammai. Practically speaking, they were ruling like Beis Shammai, and they were marrying the co-wives. They were doing yibum and chalit yibum with the co-wife of the daughter. The matter was very hard for the rabbis because they heard this real ruling in the name of Rabbi Dosa ben Horkinus. So it was very difficult for them. He was a great scholar, and ve'enav kamu milavo beis hamedrash, and his eyes, he's starting to go blind, and he stopped coming to the beis medrash. So they said, Amru mi yelech v'yodio. They said, who's going to let him know? Who's going to tell him that we're disappointed in this ruling? We think it's a very dangerous ruling. Amru, and so Rabbi Yoshua said, Ani yelech. Rabbi Yoshua said, I'm going to go and tell him. V'acharav mi. And who's going to go after Rabbi Yoshua? Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Rabbi number 2, V'acharav mi, Rabbi Akiva. 3 of the greatest rabbis of the Tanaitic period, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Akiva. So they said, we're all going to go and tell Rabbi Dosa ben Horkinus that there's a problem with his ruling. So they went and they stood at the entrance to his house. So Rabbi Dosa's maid and came into his house, and she said to him, Rabbi Chachma Yisrael b'ayin etzlecha. She said, the scholars of Israel have come to visit you. Amrullah yikansu. He said, bring them in. They came in. Tavsu Rabbi Yoshua, Moshivu al mita shel zav. He put Rabbi Yoshua and he said, sit on the golden bench. Amrullah, he said to him, Rabbi Yoshua says to him, Rabbi, and more talmidcha acher v'yeshiv. He said, Rabbi, you have another student here. You should tell him to sit. Amro Miu, he says, who is this other student? So he says, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Amar v'yeshlo ben la Azariah chavereinu. He says, does our son Azariah, he said, wow, our friend Azariah has a son? Karolav amikra zeh. He cited this verse. Nara yisi v'gam zakanti v'ora iti tzaddik nezav. He says, I was young, from Psalms, I grew old, I never saw a tzaddik abandoned, and and his seed will seek out bread. Because the Gemara in Beitza tells us that Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah and his father were both very wealthy. That's what he was saying here in this context. That look, they're both doing great. His son is a rabbi. He has a son. Beautiful thing. Amro, so then Rabbi Yoshua said, Rabbi Amro Talmidcha Achar v'yeshiv. Says you have another student here who could sit. Amro, who says, who's he? Who says, Miu Akiva ben Yosef. It's the great Rabbi Akiva. But then he was just known as Akiva ben Yosef. He wasn't really known as the great Rabbi Akiva. Amro, so he said, Ato Akiva ben Yosef sheshim chaholech misofa ha'olam v'ad sofa. He says, are you the Akiva ben Yosef whose name goes from one end of the world to the other? That Akiva? He says Rabbi Akiva didn't even answer. So he says, Shev b'ni Shev, sit my son, sit. Kamoscha yirbu b'Yisrael. There should be many more like you in Israel. They began to discuss all the halachos with Rabbi Dosa. They came to this sugya of the co-wife of the daughter. They said, the co-wife of the daughter, what's the story with that? And they said, Machokes Beishama Beisilo. So Rabbi Dosa said, well, this is a dispute between Beishama and Beisilo. And obviously Beisilo says they don't need Yibum, and Beishama says they do need Yibum. So he said, and halacha kedivrei me. Should they say to him, and who do we rule like? Amron halacha k'Beis Hillel. Says the rules like Beis Hillel. So he says, "V'alo mishimcha amru halacha k'Beis Shammai." He said, "Why are you saying the laws like Beis Hillel? We've been around the base measures. People are walking around saying that you're saying the laws like Beis Shammai, and people are following your position, and everybody's doing yibum with their co-wives, with the co-wife of their daughter." So he said, well, you heard this in my name? So Amrway, he said to them, Dosa shamatim o ben Horkin shamatim. He said, what did you hear? Did you hear Dosa said this? Or did you hear the son of Horkinus said this? They said, well, actually, now that you mention it, Stam Shamanu. And they said to him, Chayai, Rebbe, we swear, Rebbe, Stam Shemana. We just heard that they basically said Ben Horkinus. We didn't hear Dosa. Amroam, he says, yeah. Ach Katan Yeshli. He says, I have a younger brother. Bechor Satanhu. Rashi says this means, Bechor Satan means he was headstrong. And when he had an opinion, he didn't care who went against him, kept up to his opinion. The Yonasan Shemo, his name is Yonasan. Umi Talmidei Shammai. And he's one of the students of Shammai. Make sure you don't even get into a fight with him as it relates to halacha or an argument with him. He's going to prove to you 300 ways why that he's going to prove to you that the tzaras abashi muteris. He's going to prove to you 300 ways that the co-wife of the daughter is permitted. But let heaven and earth testify about me. The Chagai, the prophet, said on this mortar, and he said three things. One, Sarasabas Asura, the co-wife of the daughter is prohibited, meaning like Beis Hillel. Ammon Moav Ma'asrin Meiser Ani Bishvius. Ammon and Moav, they were supposed to give a tithe in the sabbatical year to the poor. I'll come back to that. The Gemara is going to come back to that in a few moments. And number three is Mekabel Gerim and Karduyim and Tarmudin. Number three is we accept converts from the Karduyim and the Tarmudin. Again, we're going to come back to that also in a few moments. But first, we'll finish about the Tzaras Abbas. So he said, Rabbi Dosa ben Horkin said the law is like Beis Hillel. I have a tradition from Chagai, the prophet. Tana, so the rabbis, so it's talk, so when these three rabbis went in to talk to him, they all went in through one doorway. But they all went out through three doorways. Why? Why did they go out separately? So some say because they were afraid he was going to defeat all three of them at once and then they'd have to change the law. Others say because they were trying to find this Yonasan ben Horkinus. Pagabo, But guess what happened? Baba Rabbi Akiva. Yonasan ben Horkinus met Rabbi Akiva. Ikshalei ve'ukmei. He challenged him and he defeated him about this. Amar Lei, so he said to him, Ato Akiva sheshimcha holech mitzofa olam ad sofo. Your Akiva goes from one end of the world to the other. Your name. Ashrecha shezachita l'shem. I'm glad you got such a name. Madayin lo igata ro'oi bakar. Meaning your own marketing. There's no product there. You're not even worthy of being a shepherd for cattle. So he said, Amar Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Akiva said to him, I'm not even worthy to be a shepherd for sheep. And this is a very interesting Gemara because so we see from here Yonasan ben Horkinus was sharper than Rabbi Akiva, and he could defeat everybody by 300. He had 300 reasons to defend his position. And yet we are Bnei Akiva. We are the children of Akiva, meaning to say Rabbi Akiva is our master. Rabbi Akiva is our teacher, not Yonasan. Even though Yonasan was 300 times, he had 300 reasons why Rabbi Akiva was wrong, and he defeated Rabbi Akiva in his argument. And Rabbi Akiva was nothing compared to the brilliance of Yonasan ben Horkinus. But it's because Rabbi Akiva had the humility, because Rabbi Akiva said, I'm not even worthy of being a shepherd for sheep. That's why Rabbi Akiva merited to be our teacher. Anyway, back to the other 2 points that Haggai the prophet had said. He had said 3 things, that the law is like Beis Hillel about the co-wife of a relative. And then he said we make a tithe from Ammon and Moab during the sabbatical year. The Gemara says now about that point. The Gemara said, Ammon and Moab, Ma'asr Meiser Ani B'Shvius. Ammon and Moab, they tithe to the poor in the sabbatical year. So I'm going to say this outside, and then we'll read in the Gemara. Basically, we know that every 7th year is a sabbatical year. What happened was the Jewish people, when they came up from Egypt in the Exodus story, they conquered Ammon and Moab during the time of Joshua. But that was not a full conquering, because when they came up in the time of Babylon, they didn't really conquer that land. And so therefore, when they conquered it, in the first period of the temple, but not in the second temple period, and so therefore the laws of the sabbatical year didn't apply to Ammon and Moab during the second temple period. It only applied during the first temple period to those areas. And so therefore, during the second temple period, the poor people suffered during the sabbatical year because nobody was planting the land. So where are they going to collect from the tithes? There will be less tithes. So they said that the people who lived in Ammon and Moab, who were not obeying the sabbatical year, they gave the tithes to the poor people, and they left over the corners of their field for the poor people. So that's what our Gemara is going to be talking about. So it states, it's Ammon and Moab, Ma'asr Meiser Ani B'Shvius. They tithe to the poor person in the sabbatical year. The Amar, because also it's another question. We know that you have to give a tithe to the Levites every year of the 6 years of the 7-year sabbatical cycle. But the tithe to the poor was only given in year 3 and year 6. So we don't know which tithe was given in the sabbatical year. So for that reason, they're teaching us that the tithe in the sabbatical year was also the tithe to the poor, and not the Meiser Sheni, which was given in years 1, 2, 4, and 5. So the Amar Mar Harbe Krachim Kavshu Olei Mitzrayim. Well, Kavshu Oli Babel. As we learned, there are many villages, many towns that the people came up from Egypt conquered during the time of Joshua. Well, Kavshu Oli Babel, but they didn't conquer it when they came up from Babylon. Kedusha Rishona Kitchel Ashatev or Kitchel Asedlavo. And the first conquering they conquered for that moment, it was only a sanctity for that moment, but not for eternity. And they left behind these lands. They didn't conquer these lands. We're on the bottom of 16a. They didn't conquer these lands during the time of the Babylonian period intentionally, because we wanted to leave lands for the poor people to be able to be sustained from. So that's what this law that Haggai the prophet had told us. Haggai was the last of the prophets, so he was around the time of when they were conquering these lands. They said, leave over the lands of Ammon and Moab from conquering so that the poor people can be nourished from these lands. And what's the third law? The third law that Haggai the prophet said, And the third law was we accept the converts from the Karduyin and from the Talmudim. So the Gemara says, is that really the case? Any. But we have a different version that says you don't accept the converts from the Karduyim. So Amar Ashi says, well, that's not a problem because there's two people. There's Karduyim and Kartuyim. So he said no. He said Kartuyim. Kartuyim. Itmar. No, he didn't say Karduyim that we don't accept converts from. He said from the Kartuyim. Kedamar Inchi Kartuyim are psulim. The Kartuyim are disqualified. And some say Tani Rami Bar Chazko Emekalim Gerim Kartuyim. One version is you don't accept converts from the Kartuyim. Aren't they the same people? So Maravashi, no, they're not the same. They're completely different people. The Kartuyim are one and the Karduyim are the other. The Kartuyim are disqualified. Rabbi Yochanan v'Sabaya the Amrei Travayo. Rabbi Yochanan and Sabaya, both of them said, so even though Chagai said you do accept the converts from the Tardumim, we have a statement from Rabbi Yochanan who says you don't. He must not have had that tradition from Chagai the prophet. So the Gemara asks, so me and Rabbi Yochanan, how did Rabbi Yochanan really say you don't accept the converts from the Talmudim? And why wouldn't we accept the converts from the Talmudim? So let's just stop there for a moment. What's the reason why we wouldn't? So the reason why we accept the converts is because Rashi says we're accepting the converts because we're saying that they were never Jewish. But the ones who says that we don't accept the converts says because there's a concern that they were Jewish, and they were Jewish, they became considered mamzerim, bastards, because what happened was it was a relationship from the Jewish girl with an idolater. And there is some opinions that say that the offspring of such a union is a mamzer. So the approach that says we don't accept the converts is because we're saying that these Jewish women were with the idolaters and therefore the offspring is a mamzer. So Rabbi Yochanan here says that we don't accept it. So the Gemara asks, does Rabbi Yochanan really correct in saying that? And the Amar Rabbi Yochanan Hachi, but didn't we learn? But we have a statement in the Mishnah in Baba Kama and in Nida that all the stains from a menstrual woman, the Nida, if they came from a place called Rechem, they're tahor. They are not considered tamei. The rabbis, we know a Jewish woman who's a Nida is considered to be ritually impure. The rabbis made a decree upon also the stained garments of the Jewish woman that they're also tamei. But they didn't make this decree upon the stained garments of the non-Jewish women. It's only the Jewish women. So they said all the stained garments that come from Rechem, they're tahor because the people there are all not Jewish, or the majority are not Jewish. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda metame, Rabbi Yehuda says, no, they are a problem, they are tamei, because he says, Meshaim Gerim Vitoim Vitoim. So the reason, so Rabbi Yehuda says that those garments are tamei, and the reason is because they were converted, and that's why they look. And why do they look to us like they are idolaters? Is because we tell them they went back and they went back to their idolatrous ways. But says Rabbi Yehuda, if they literally came from the idolaters, they're tahor. So Rabbi Yehuda says the ones that came from Rechem are tamei because they're really from Jews who now became apostates to the idolatrous faith. And about that Mishnah, we said kapasa kvitani. About that, the Mishnah learns that any stain that comes, that any stain that comes from the idolaters is considered tahor, and afil min tarmud. And the statement was, even from this place, a stained garment from Talmud is tahor. And so we see from here, and Amar Rabbi Yochanan Zos Ameres Mekavon Keremi Talmud. So from here we see, since we accept the stained garments from Talmud, that means the people from Talmud are not Jewish, and that's why Rabbi Yochanan says we can accept the converts even from the place called Talmud. So we have one statement here. Rabbi Yochanan says we accept the converts from Talmud, but on the previous page, Rabbi Yochanan said we don't accept the converts from Talmud because they're really Jewish. So and they're mamzerim. So which is it? So the Gemara says, V'chitema. And if you want to say Zos Philosopher, if you want to say, well, Rabbi Yochanan says the Mishnah is saying we accept the converse from Talmud, but we don't actually agree with that Mishnah. That's not possible. This is an anonymous Mishnah, and Rabbi Yochanan says the law is always like the anonymous Mishnah. So how do we explain this contradiction within Rabbi Yochanan? So it explains the Gemara Amoraim Ninhu. There's two Amoraim. The rabbis are arguing with Rabbi Yochanan. So the rabbis are arguing about what Rabbi Yochanan said. So that's it. One statement says Rabbi Yochanan says we do accept it from Talmud, and the other statement says we don't because they're really Jewish people. So the Gemara says, my timer. Well, what's the reason why we wouldn't accept the converts from the place called Talmud? So Puigi ba Rabbi Yochanan and Sabaya. So Rabbi Yochanan and Sabaya have a dispute about this. Chad Amar Mishum Abdei Shlomo, Chad Amar Mishum Benos Yerushalayim. Again, the reason why we wouldn't accept the converts is because they're really Jewish. They came from a union where one of the parties was Jewish, and where it seems like the man was Jewish, and at this point, it's not clear. The Gemara is going to go back and forth. But in the initial page, Rashi had said that if it's and that's what it seems like at this point in the Gemara, that if the woman was Jewish and the man was an idolater, the offspring is a mamzer. So therefore, we stayed here that Rabbi Yochanan and Sabaya explained why these people from Talmud we wouldn't accept their converts because they're really mamzerim, Jewish mamzerim. And what's the explanation? Mishum Avdei Shlomo. One says it's because of the servants of Solomon. That the other explanation is because of the daughters of Jerusalem. What's the explanation? Because of the servants of Solomon. Because, as we said, what's the explanation? The explanation is because he says that a male idolater and a servant who had relations with a Jewish girl, the offspring is a mamzer. And so therefore the offspring of Solomon, the servants of Solomon had relations with the Jewish women. And so therefore the Rashi says they married Jewish girls because they were so wealthy and they lived there as idolaters. And so therefore the offspring are mamzerim, but they're Jews. But we don't rule like that today, by the way, but that was the ruling of this at this point in the Gemara. What's the reasoning why the daughters of Jerusalem? So the Gemara explains, one says the reason is one says there were 12,000 men and 6,000 bows and arrows. One says there were 12,000 men, and of which 6,000 were archers. That these idolaters, they entered into the temple. When everybody entered into the temple, most of the people went to get the money. But these people, they went to the daughters of Jerusalem. As it says, the women of Zion, they assaulted the virgins of the cities of Judah. And Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani said about this, Amar Rabbi Yonasan, so okay, wait, we'll stop for a moment. That's why these offspring were mamzerim, because they were the offspring of males who are idolaters and Jewish females, either from the servants of Solomon who are not Jewish, they were idolaters, or else from the servants who invaded the temple, the idolaters, and they assaulted the Jewish women. So now the Gemara goes back to a statement. The Gemara quotes the verse that Rabbi Dosa, when he saw Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, he said this verse, I was young and I grew old and I never saw a righteous person abandoned. So the Gemara says this verse in Psalms, Man Amrei, who's the one who said it? You want to say God? God said it can't be. Mihika zikna kame. Nobody gets old, and God does not get old. God says, I grew old. Ella David Amar. You want to say David said it? Can't be. Mikashish koyai. David was 70. 70 is not old. He was a young 70. 70 is not old, which is refreshing to hear as I'm coming closer to 70. Who said it? The angel of the world said it. I don't know who that is, but that's the angel of the world. Rashi says Malach was an angel. The Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani Amar Rabbi Yonasan. What does it mean? So now we go back to the other verse, which talks about the invaders conquered the daughters of Jerusalem. What does it mean? Yado paras sar al kol machmadeha. What does it mean? His hand stretched out on all of it and afflicted all of its delights. What does that mean? This refers to Ammon and Moab. When the idolaters went into the sanctuary, everybody went to gold and silver. But Ammon and Moab, what did they do? They didn't go to the daughters of Jerusalem. They went to the Torah scroll. And they said, about this, which it says that the Ammonite and the Moabite cannot come into the community of God, this should be burnt by fire. And then, because it says in the Torah, you're not allowed to marry an Ammonite and Moabite. So they said, let's burn the Torah. Siva Hashem Yaakov. And what about the verse that says, God commanded Jacob, Svivav, Tzarav, who was surrounded by his enemies. Amarav, Kigon Homanya from Nahara. These are like the enemies of the Jews who are surrounding the Jewish people, like the people of Homanya to the people of Pum Nahara. And Amarav Yehuda, Amarav Asi, Ovik, Chavim. Okay, so now we're up to this next point, which is about an idolater who betrothed nowadays, that we have to be concerned that really every idolater is Jewish, and so therefore maybe it's a valid betrothal. And so we're going to pick that up, God willing, in tomorrow's daf. But if somebody has any questions, I'll be happy to